welcome all of you here this evening. It's wonderful to see you. As Terry said, my name is Dawn, and I am a resident of Chase River. In fact, I used to come to Parent Advisory Committee meetings in this very room once a month. My son is an alumni of the school, and also went to John Barsby, was in the band program, played football, and went on tour band to Hawaii. But before George, because he's a bit older than George. I live in Cinnabar Valley and have lived in Nanaimo for the past 30 years. Came here to attend Malsapina College and do a social work program. And raised my son here. And so I'm very connected to this community and have worked in the social services field since 1978 and have worked at various social service agencies. And Terry caught me at a weak moment. Sure. So she asked me, well, if you were to think, and so I talked a lot about my grandmother, who's had a lot of influence in my life, and who has been a very important, strong example of integrity for all the women in our family. And she asked me if you could sort of lend a synopsis to your story, what would you say? And I said, for me, it's all about belonging and being a Canadian. I'm seventh generation Canadian. My family has been here since 1827. I have a grandmother that was born, or a ancestor that was born in Upper Sackville in Nova Scotia in 1827. Her parents were here before then. So we've been here for a long time. I have a cousin that's doing a genealogy of our family right now, and there are close to 3,000 of us spread from Newfoundland to Nanaimo. So we're a fairly prolific family. The thing that I struggled with a lot when I was a young child was not having a sense of belonging and not knowing who my family was. And when I was originally born in Nova Scotia, however, my parents thought that we would have better advantage moving west. So when I was 8, we trekked across Canada and left a fairly extensive family in Nova Scotia. And not only did we trek across Canada to the west coast, but we decided to go north to a small community called Terrace. And so, yeah, and that was like in 1964. And I remember getting off that plane, and it was about this time of year, because my youngest brother, or one of my younger brothers, had just been born, and he was born in February, so it would have been around my birthday in March. Getting off the plane, and I remember the gravel roads, and I remember this one-way bridge, and I remember the first day of school, walking into the school. I think I was in grade 2 at the time, and this was 63, 64, something like that. And we were the only blacks there. And it was my sister and I, and we were in a grade 2-3 split. She was in grade 2 and I was in grade 3. And one of my brothers was in kindergarten. And I remember the walk down the hall, and the three of us. And I stood in the center, and my sister stood on one side, and my brother on the other. And just being in this foreign land, and we had never been around that many white people in our entire lives. And I remember feeling that I was different, and that's the first time I ever felt different, because prior to that, I'd lived in a fairly large black community. We had white people who were family members. We were, I have aunts and uncles that are whites. I have cousins that are biracial, but I really felt alone, and I've never quite had that feeling since then. But I distinctly remember that feeling. I remember the first time that I was called a nigger, or the only time I've actually ever been called a nigger, was on the playground at that school. We were playing Foursquare, which is one of my favorite games. I don't know if people are familiar with Foursquare. Four squares, and then you bounce the ball, and I was really good at it. And when you got to square 4, you could serve the ball. And I was at square 3, and I missed the ball. And I remember hearing one of the kids in the lineup waiting to get into the square to play the game saying, you missed the ball, nigger, or something along those lines. And I remember just sort of standing there very silently and feeling very alone. I remember just sort of not, things went silent for me, and not knowing what to do. And I think it was I was in grade 3 at the time. Anyway, lunch hour was over, we go back to class, sit down in the class, and my grade 3 teacher, Mrs. Metzmeyer, who was this huge, she probably wasn't huge, but she seemed larger than life at the time. She only wore 3 dresses throughout the entire year. A blue one, a green one, a white one. White in the spring and the fall, and green and blue in the winter. Anyway, Mrs. Metzmeyer comes into the class and she says, Dawn, this was the grade 2-3 split. She says, Dawn, Angela, which was my sister, and Robert, follow me. He was the boy that had called out the name. So the 3 of us went down to the class, or went down to the principal's office, and she said, she says to the principal, explains to him what happened, that this boy had called us names, and she says, I want you to strap him. And I remember standing there, and we watched as he received the strap, and then feeling just absolutely terrible that he was getting the strap, that it was in front of us, and that he was quite embarrassed and angry. And then going back to the class, and then every day after that, Mrs. Metzmeyer's son came to the class, and he would sit at the back of the class. And it turned out that he was half black. Nobody knew this. She had been separated. She was a single mother, and that was her message to the class, that racism and bigotry would not be tolerated in her class. And so that is an experience that stayed with me for my entire life. And I was fortunate enough to live with a family who, although our family moved all the way across Canada into this small community, I was fortunate enough that it was really, that my parents really felt it was important for us to know our heritage. And so every summer, they would pile us into the station wagon, and we would go down to the States to learn how to be black. And it was an 18-hour drive from Terrace to Vancouver with only pee stops, because my father didn't have a lot of patience for sightseeing along the way. And so we'd get to Vancouver, and we would stop at my uncle's place, and we would overnight there, and then we would go to Seattle, and we would stay with my father's cousins. That's when I could take my hair out of my braids, and I could straighten it, I could put it in an afro, and I could be black for the summer. Wow. And that's where I learned how to do the rock steady. That's where I learned how to, which was a dance. That's where I learned how to do the electric quilt glide. That's where we pick up the latest albums and phrasing, and just be really cool for the summer. And then we would get back to Vancouver at the end of the summer, and we'd have to go back to the straight hair and not be so colorful, and go back to Terrace. But as I said, I was very lucky that they made sure that we knew a lot about Black history. So I knew who Woodsman was, I knew who Martin Luther King was, I knew who Rosa Parks, thank you. I knew who Harriet Tubman was. I knew a lot about. We sat down as a family and watched Roots. I knew who the Alexanders were on Salt Spring Island. Knew a lot about the Black community in Vancouver, and we were raised with a lot of pride. And I was lucky in the sense that at no time did we pretend that we weren't anything other than Black kids living in a white community, and we were the only Blacks there. We were a family of 8 for probably about 15 years. And I can sort of identify with what you were talking about. I can identify in terms of what you were talking about when you came to this community. And there was a sea of white faces. But the funny thing is I was always more comfortable being in a sea of white faces than I was being in a sea of Black faces, because I've been raised in entirely white communities. And I remember going across the border and being in culture shock. I was like, they know who I am. I'm sticking out like a sore thumb, when in fact I wasn't. I was fitting in. But just because of my cultural, how I was raised culturally, I mean, I was sort of raised to as part of a community of whites, and I just happened to be black. I raised our son was raised here, and as I said, he attended this school, and he's biracial. His dad's white, and I'm black, obviously. And I think the proudest moment of my life was when he was sitting in a class in the school, and a teacher or an area counselor was doing a life skills class, and they were doing a class that focused on social development and interpersonal skills development. And this particular class was about anger management, and so I didn't find out about this until about a month after the fact, and I guess my son stood up, and basically what this teacher was telling him was that if you were black, you were less educated, you lived in poverty, and were more prone to violent behavior. What this has to do with teaching kids how to manage their behavior and their anger in an appropriate manner has nothing to do. I mean, it was beyond my comprehension. So anyway, it was my husband and I were visiting some friends, and it was my friend who said, you won't believe what Tristan did. That's my son. He stood up in class and he told this teacher that he felt that this class was culturally biased, and he was leaving. And this was in grade 7, and he walked out. And didn't come home and say anything to us. The school didn't phone us. It wasn't until a month later that a friend of mine mentions this to me. And then my mother was staying with us at the time, and we'd been out for dinner at this friend's place. And Mom was ready to go down to the school now. Well, we can't go home, it's Saturday night. But we can go Monday morning. So anyway, we came down to the school, and we spoke with the area counselor. It was funny because I worked in the school systems in the school system at the time, and he was a colleague. And so it was a bit of a difficult conversation to have with him. What he didn't get was, I kept saying, I don't understand why you're using American statistics to teach a class in Canada about, and particularly why you're using this example when you're teaching kids about anger management and inappropriate behaviors in terms of interpersonal skills. I don't understand, what the connection is here. And he told me, and I'll never forget this, he told me that he'd been teaching this class in the school district for a number of years, and at no time, in the Nanaimo school district, and at no time had anybody ever complained about this particular module. And I said, he told me that he had had Asian kids, South Asian kids, he'd had First Nations kids, and he had Caucasian kids in this class, and nobody has ever mentioned anything about this particular piece, and he's not changed the curriculum in all the time that he has taught this particular piece. And I said to him, so, have you ever had a black kid sit in the class while you're teaching this? And he said, no. And I said, well, when you talk about these statistics that have nothing to do with Canada, by the way, they're American statistics, you're not talking to that conversation isn't being reflected or isn't being directed at kids who are black. If I was First Nations, if I was Asian, or if I was white, it has nothing to do with me. But it does have something to do with my son. And he said, that my son had overreacted, and that he's the only person that in the class that had overreacted. And I said, well, you know what? I need you to know that my brother has 3 kids that attend this school as well. And my brother's wife is blonde and blue-eyed, and her kids, and their kids are blonde and blue-eyed. Half black, but blonde and blue-eyed. And I also need you to know that there are over 100 kids in this school, and that we only represent 3%. We represent 3% of the population in Chase River. and at no time have we committed any crimes. We do not live in poverty, and we are educating our kids. And so I don't understand what this has to do with anger management. I said, I'm a child and youth care worker. I have worked with high-risk kids for a number of years, and I have never used someone's ethnicity to demonstrate a teachable moment in terms of interpersonal skills. So he then said that he apologized if he said, I apologize if I've offended you in any way. I said, you haven't offended me. You've offended my son, and that's who you need to apologize to. And I hope that you're able to do that. And then he said to me, I am not changing my curriculum because it's effective. And I said, okay, well, that's your prerogative. So then I wrote to the school district. And he did end up changing his curriculum. But the curriculum was changed for all the wrong reasons as far as I was concerned. I received a letter back from the school district telling me that because I had concerns and I raised the issue of color or that because a parent of a black child had complained about the curriculum, they were changing the curriculum. And for me, it wasn't about the color of anybody's skin. It was about using stereotyping. And it could have been a First Nations child, it could have been an Asian child, it could have been a Caucasian child. It just so happened that the statistics that he used were and the statistics that he used was just crazy. They were from Chicago, Cabrini Green, which is like an inner city project. What that has to do with rural James River was beyond me. But as I said, I mean, I've gone through periods in my life where I haven't felt that I belonged, and I think with my cousin doing this genealogy, it's been really helpful. I mean, I've discovered amazing things about my family. The other thing that's been really helpful for me is that I was a women's studies major, and so a lot of what I did while I was doing women's studies was examining my position and my standpoint in feminism and where my beliefs around feminism derived from. And they derived from the women in my life. And so in doing that, I needed to really sort of delve into my family and listen to the stories that the women in my family tell. And my grandmother was one of the first women. They were called Women of the Well, and they were the first women of Congress, black women of Congress, or colored women of Congress, that met in Nova Scotia in 1917 to talk about the social conditions and the education and the economic conditions of blacks in Nova Scotia at that time. That was 1917, and that was pretty progressive. My grandmother also was one of the women that developed during the 30s. It was called the Colored Women's Benevolent Society. And you talked about church being a very, very much a part of your community. Church was very much the epicenter of my family's life. Not so much in that they were strident Christians. It's just that was a place where people came together, and that was a place of helping. And everybody knew everybody, and the whole philosophy of it takes a village to raise a child is very self-evident to that day in the same community. My family still lives in the house that my grandparents bought in 1921. They crossed the color line in Halifax. My grandfather was white, and he actually went out and bought the house, and then he moved with my grandmother and the kids in. It was a little bit of a shock to the people that lived there. But they still own that same house. They were involved in 1963. My family was involved in, I don't know if people are familiar with Africville, which was a community in Halifax that was appropriated by the city. And I have a video, a National Film Board video that is a treasured piece in my family that sort of gets passed around. God help you if you misplace it. And there were members of my family, and my mother remembers them, that refused to leave their land, and there were bulldozers outside their home, and the CBC was there. So I guess what I want to say is, I guess the message that I want to send out is that, you know, I'm not an immigrant. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm as Canadian as I can get. And I love meeting people from different cultures, but I'm not African, I'm not Congolese, I'm not Jamaican, I'm Canadian. And I think that there's different shades of blackness, and I really hope, and that's the message that I really want to get across to people, is that, yeah, I'm Canadian.
And so was the telling of the stories really important, a big part of your family, because that had to come from somewhere, didn't it? That these kids have this identity.
Yeah.
So was it storytelling, do you think?
It was storytelling, and I think that it was, and just sort of also really being really clear about the kinds of contributions that Blacks have made to the community. So, you know, my son knows, he used to cross Stark's Landing every day on his way to school, so he knows who Louis Stark is, and he knows who Emily Stark is. He was involved in a lot of Black history celebrations that I've been involved with throughout the years as well.
Any other questions?
Yeah. You ended with saying that I'm Canadian. Do you get questions like, "Oh, where are you originally from?"
Yeah. Yeah. For some reason, people don't believe me.
I mean, like from Caribbean or Africa?
Usually the Caribbean, and people tend to qualify it with, "Well, you look like you're Jamaican." I don't know. Apparently it's my cheekbones.
Okay.
It's funny actually. When we came in at the beginning, I have a friend who's from Trinidad, and I said to John, "How much you look like my friend Sandra." Very much like her, and she's actually Indian of background.
Well, when I was younger, I used to pretend that I was American. I adopt a Southern accent or I just play along with people. Like, you're not going to believe me. I'm just going to go along with them.
Any other questions?
I just have one comment with when you say I am Canadian. A few years back I would have said, yeah, I'm Canadian as well. But I struggle with that because I know that my grandparents weren't Canadian. They immigrated here. And so sometimes I think I really don't know what I truly am and what is Canadian. So and I see Canada changing so much that you said there are different shades of black. I'm seeing different shades of Canadian.
Exactly. I mean, we're a cultural mosaic. I mean, that's part of the mission statement of the Canadian government. Is to promote the mosaic of our culture. And I think that that it's important to know that there are different shades of Canadian, and that what you bring to the table, Dawn, is really important in terms of of your cultural background.
I think that's a strong message that I'm getting as well as celebrating your culture and sharing it, whatever that culture is that a person identifies with, and sharing it with other people and sharing it with children, and that's a very healthy way to embrace life.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wait a minute, over there.
Oh, sorry. I think the big identity we can all identify with is that of world citizens.
Yes, yeah. That's a good point.
I was just wanted to share with you that how young these attitudes and views will start. My daughter was quite fair. I'm French Cree, and I took her to Ontario for my sister's wedding. And my uncle, we swear that he's part Negro, but he's got curly hair and looks a bit like Sammy Davis Jr., right? And he's fairly dark. So Natalie's sitting on his lap, and my Uncle Danny's got his hand on her, and she looks at his hand, she looks up, she goes, "How come you're so dirty?" Everybody just cracked at that, right? And that was Uncle Danny's nickname when he was a kid, you know. And then one day I go home with a friend of mine, and he's my blood brother. He's native. He's really native, right? And she looks at him, you know, it's still young, 3-ish, and she's just in awe. I said, "Oh, this is Monty. He's an Indian." Because she goes, "He is?" And I says, "Yeah, I'm an Indian too." She says, "You are?" I says, "Yeah, and so are you." She says, "I am."
Yeah, out of the mouths of babes.